Hello, everyone. My name is Malcolm Guy, and we're about to start our webinar on West Asia, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the people's response. So I'd really like to welcome you here today. My name is Malcolm Guy, and I'm coming to you from Montreal, Quebec, Canada. I'm the Vice Chair of External Affairs at the International League of People's Struggle, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a minute. And today we're going to have a webinar teach-in, which is part of our series called Interviews, which we are holding regularly at this time, this day and this time, Thursdays at this time. Looking at the global situation, what's happening particularly now with the COVID-19 pandemic. But of course, we will be continuing this series in the future as well. You can find us on the YouTube channel of ILPS Official. We are streaming to that channel at this moment. If you are not joining us on Zoom, and welcome to those who are joining us on Zoom. So before we start, I'll get a couple of technical things out of the way. So as mentioned, we're coming to you via Zoom and the YouTube channel. If you have any problems with your sound, go down to the bottom of your Zoom screen, go to the left, and you'll see a microphone there, and you can adjust the sound levels and so on there. You will also, at the bottom of your screen, find a button which says Q&A, and there you will be able to send questions for our panelists to answer. We have 3 panelists today. And also you can choose your language. Today we will have presentations mostly in English, but we will have interpretation to and from French. So you will see the interpretation button there at the bottom of your, or depending what device you're using, at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you can click on that, you can choose the language that you would like to listen to this event in. Vous avez le choix aujourd'hui de l'anglais ou de français pour notre réunion, webinaire. Vous pouvez choisir avec le bouton interprétation en bas de votre écran la langue de votre choix. Dans votre cas, les gens qui m'écoutent en français, vous allez choisir français naturellement et vous allez l'écouter toute notre webinaire en français, et vous pouvez aussi adresser vos questions en français. Okay, so we'll get underway. My name is Guy, and we're about to start our webinar on West Asia, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the people's response. So I'd really like to, just one moment, please. I'll just resolve a little technical problem I have. Vice Chair of External Affairs at the International League of People's Struggle, which I'll tell you about. There we go. Okay, good. So I was hearing myself on YouTube, which was not very comfortable. Okay, good. So we're going to get underway. And today we have 3 excellent panelists who you're going to hear from. Our event today will last about 1 hour and a quarter. We're going to hear from 3 panelists, from Amman, Jordan, RAZAN ZUAYTER, who I'll introduce shortly. We're going to also hear from Barchir Nakhal, from Beirut, Lebanon, and Charlotte Cates from the Samidoun Palestinian Prisoner Solidarity Network, who is coming to us today from Vancouver, Canada. As I mentioned, I'm the Vice Chair of External Affairs at the ILPS, and this is the second in our series interviews. The first we held about 3 weeks ago, and our guest at that time was Professor Jose Maria Cizon, who is the chair emeritus of the International League of People's Struggle. Now, probably most of you know about the International League of Struggle if you've managed to come to us and find us today, but I'll just mention that it's an international formation of anti-imperialist and democratic mass organizations around the globe in over 40 countries, and we have almost 400 mass or organization members around the globe. So it really has a global impact and is one of the most important anti-imperialist organizations at work today. So I'll tell you a little bit more at the end how you can become a member, or if you'd like to know more about it. And we do have a website, of course, that you can check, which is ilps.info. So I've no need to tell you that we're looking at West Asia today, and this is an area which has naturally a rich history. We've all heard about that history between the rivers Tigris and Euphrates. Anyway, so many centuries of history of humankind comes from there. But of course, what we don't hear about that so much. What we hear about is all the fact that this area is rich in turmoil today, and wars of imperialist aggression and wars of resistance. So, of course, it's rich in turmoil in part because it's so rich in other ways in terms of natural resources, including, of course, oil. So, and of course, you know the countries in the region, whether it's Syria, whether it's Yemen, whether it's Iran, whether it's Lebanon, whether it's Saudi Arabia, Iraq, but it's a vast area. And we call it West Asia. Many refer to it as the Middle East, but one may ask, it's the middle of what? Of course, that was the kind of vision from the European colonialists. There was the Far East and the Middle East. So we've called it West Asia, but just to situate you, we are referring to the Middle East, all the way from Turkey over to Iran. And today I could say much about that region. Of course, you know you all know about the wars that have been underway in Syria, about the war that's ongoing in Yemen. You know about the situation with Iran and the very serious situation there as far as the COVID-19 pandemic is concerned, brought about in large part by the sanctions, the US-led sanctions against Iran. So we'll have a chance to expand on that a little bit later. But first, we're going to hear from our panelists, and I'd like to first turn to RAZAN ZUAYTER. RAZAN, maybe you could turn your video on so we can see you. There we are. Welcome, RAZAN. So RAZAN is the, and correct me if I get anything wrong, RAZAN. RAZAN is the global co-chairperson of the People's Coalition on Food Sovereignty, which develops and promotes the people's food sovereignty as an alternative platform against neoliberal globalization on food and agriculture. I'm sure she'll be able to tell you more about that if you want to know. And she's also the founder of the Arab for the Protection of Nature, which educates and raises awareness of contemporary environmental challenges in the West Asia region. And she'll probably talk about this later, perhaps, or you can ask her about it. They have, among other things, a 1 million tree campaign. And I liked one of their slogans that they put forward, which was, they uproot a tree in Palestine and we plant 10. So I will also mention that RAZAN is a member of the International Coordinating Committee of the International League of People's Struggle. She's talking to us today from Amman, Jordan. She's going to talk about 15 minutes, and then we'll be hearing from our other panelists. So RAZAN, welcome.
Thank you so much, Malcolm. Good day, everybody, whether morning or evening. And I'm very happy to be here. I'm very thankful for ILPS to opening this chance for us. I find this as a solidarity event, and I hope I can reflect some of our thoughts, and will be very happy to receive questions afterwards. For the time allocated for me, I divided my talk into 3 parts. The first part will be general reflections about the situation now. And since we're talking about the corona. And the second part will be some specific information about the region, which I found might be useful for our discussion. And the third part will be just highlighting the role and the demands of our constituencies in that regard. So if you allow me, I will start by the first part, which are my general reflections about the issue of what I call global earthquake or global tornado, the corona issue. This earthquake unveiled a very big crisis in ethics and values. There is a humongous deterioration in the values, I think, in the whole world. It's not only in the capitalist part. We are shocked by many signs of lack of values. The racist crimes, especially in the capitalist countries, we felt no compassion between people. It was horrifying. This herd immunity really is shocking and alarming. Prioritizing some age to the other age is also unquestionably horrifying. In our region, for example, the old people are a source of wisdom, of sanity, of happiness, of peace, while they, in some other locations, they are considered a burden. So I think this lack of compassion should be addressed. And in the South also, we know we have lack of human rights, but it was shocking, the situation of the workers, whether farmers or daily workers, which they live from the daily subsidies, that we realized it was very strong, because they could not really face this without social security or many other human rights. So I think we should compare notes between our regions and maybe analyze better how could we face this lack of values, how could we draw our roadmaps to improve the situation. The second reflection has to do with the food security and food sovereignty. As Malcolm said, I am the president of the Arab Network for Food Sovereignty, and we have been working and advocating for food security and food sovereignty in the Arab world. Not always have we been listened to or understood. Unfortunately, when we approached several governments in the region, especially in the Gulf, about the necessity of food sovereignty and food security and integration of policies for food security in the region, they used to tell us, we have money, why should we care about producing food? So this coronavirus brought back the importance of food security and food sovereignty for our globe. So this is a summary of general reflections. And I would like now to speak a little bit about our region in specific regions, in specific locations. We have in our region, which is West Asia and North Africa, because we used to call this the Arab world. But now it is bigger, including Iran and Turkey and so on. So we call it WANA, which is West Asia and North Africa. We have big challenges that far exceed, in my opinion, the coronavirus issue. We have the wars, we have the occupations, and we have the sanctions. We feel that hell broke loose in our region, and these three factors amplify the danger of corona, of course. I would like to give you some insight into some areas. I will speak about Yemen as an example. We have talked with our members in Yemen in our network, and the situation there, I'm sure you are all aware of the horrific war in Yemen. The conflict that started 6 years ago is still on, in spite of the corona problem. The coalition has resumed the bombarding, air bombardment of Yemen, and the UAE and which said they will stop their aggression. They did not do it, unfortunately. The Saudi Arabia, after saying that they will stop it for the coronavirus, they had made 454 attacks during this ceasefire note, and the peace talks, which are in Sweden, they ended without any success. So 16 million of people in Yemen wake up every day hungry. 3.5 million were forced out of their homes, and the sad thing that war have destroyed more than half of the health facilities in Yemen. USA stopped its aid, and the situation is very bad. The country announced its first COVID virus in the 10th of April. Still, the numbers are not big. Like all this region, the coronavirus is not really as infesting as in the north. But the threat is that there's no health facilities, and the war is still on. So Yemen needs instant intervention to stop the war. We rely that the Yemenis are resisting injustice, and in our opinion, they will overcome, inshallah. If we come to Syria, you know, Syria was the only Arab country which has self-sufficiency in wheat, and they had self-sufficiency in food, and this really helped them in this coronavirus situation, because they are still relying on their own produce. They have local farming. Their prices are the least in the world now in their food items, the vegetables, the wheat. Syria is undergoing sanctions, very harsh sanctions. They have around 18 billion loss in their economy, but we think also Syria, after regaining 70% of its land, it will really face this challenge, and they will. People are very compassionate with each other, and the situation hopefully will the health issue will be solved, inshallah. Now, if we want to talk about, for example, Jordan, the government has played a very good role in controlling the epidemic. And we feel they have acted in a right way, maybe because they are free to act as the superpowers are busy in their own issues. But we have a big problem, as I told you, with the issue of the workers. It's not solved yet. We have great danger of some hunger and extreme poverty. hoping that it will be also addressed. We have a problem of the marketing of the produce of the farmers. Farmers and agriculture is very marginalized in Jordan as well as in all the region. And we think this is an intention to keep this region not sovereign over their political actions, because if you deprive the people of their food and their ability to produce their own food, this means you can control them politically, and this is very well known, as Kissinger has said before. If you want to control countries, you control the oil. If you want to control the people, you control their food. So I hope that in Jordan, as well as the other countries in the region, will realize this fact and they will work on their food security more seriously. Our response as people here through our networks and through our movement is really to support small farmers. We have started campaigns to establish home gardens. So we say, even if you have 5 meters, you can grow food. Even you have a roof, a balcony, a small yard. In the villages, we are supplying seeds, we are supplying trees, we are supplying other resources. And we are hopeful that we can systemize this support in a bigger portions when situation we can move, because there is a curfew here in Jordan most of the day. In Lebanon, maybe Barchir will speak about Lebanon, but we have members of our network now are distributing seeds in very reasonable cost, and the issue of agriculture has risen to the utmost importance. And we Lebanese, as Jordanians, and as, let's say, some other Arab countries, are aware of the importance of agriculture now. Some of our members in Morocco have the problems also of workers, markets, and the drought. We have to speak also about Iran. Everybody knows the harsh sanctions against Iran, and this makes the situation more difficult to address the coronavirus, especially that their accounts are blocked in the USA and they cannot really use them. So this is a quick light I'm shedding on some of our region. I would like to leave many of the issues to discussion, but I would like now to speak about our role as social movements and people's organizations in facing the coronavirus and this current situation. And here I speak of in my capacity as a co-chair of the People's Coalition on Food Security and the Arab Network for Food Sovereignty, to tell you about our demands and our objective at this moment. So our objective is really to amplify rural voices in policymaking spaces during and after the COVID-19 pandemic, and to communicate demands of rural communities and food producers, and urge states and other international bodies to implement radical food policy reforms with regards to appropriate support to rural communities and livelihoods during and after pandemic, to relevant stakeholders and decision makers. This is our objective, and we have 9 demands. I will list them quickly. I hope they will cover all aspects that are of concern to our region, and I think to the whole globe. The first one is to guarantee the right to food amid lockdown, because it is threatened, as you know. The second is to prioritize local food production, and this is one of the most important factors to stop the pandemic from more spread, and to support people's rights, and especially in in farm areas and in villages and so on. The third demand is to recognize and extend support to farmers as essential workers, and they are really marginalized in all our region. The fourth demand is to set up and support local markets. And now in this Corona situation, we realize how important is that, because the people are not being able to access the central market, which is the only place where they are allowed, where farmers are allowed to put their produce. So hoping that after the pandemic, the local markets will be applied. Our fifth demand is to strengthen strategic national reserves. And this is extremely important. And we saw in this time of the pandemic how important is that. The sixth demand is to review and revise national land use policies to reflect the increased needs for domestic food production. And I want to say here only not land, we need to allow access to all inputs for production, from seeds to pesticides to fertilizers and all. And the seventh demand is to depolitize food aid. You know, the conditional food aid is one of the main problems of food sovereignty and political sovereignty in our region. So we think this should be addressed. The eighth demand, we demand to lift international sanctions and to cease military aggressions. This is a very important factor at the moment. And the last demand is to increase transparency and accountability. So our work will be from now on to enhance all these and to work to put action plans together with the international movements and our region to try to address all these issues. This is a summary of what I wanted to say, and I would love to hear any questions or any concerns. And I again thank you for this chance.
Thank you very much, RAZAN. Lots of food for thought there, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to follow up a little later during our discussion period. And I remind people, all of those joining us today, either on Zoom. On Zoom, you can open your Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window or wherever it is located on your device, and send us your questions in the Q&A. We'd be glad to present them to the panelists a little bit later, or as soon as we can get to them. And for you, for those of you watching us on YouTube, please put your comments and questions in the comment section of YouTube, and we will try to address those questions as well a little bit later. All right, we'll move on to our second speaker now. We'll be moving from Amman, Jordan, over a little bit to the east to Beirut, Lebanon. And we'll be hearing from Barchir Nakhal. Barchir, maybe you could join us with your video. Barchir Nakhal is a student activist, and again, Barchir, you make sure that I get your information correct. Barchir is a student activist from the Red Oak Club, which is a student youth organization in Lebanon, and is an ILPS member organization. He was an organizer in the 2015 trash movement, among other things, and he can tell you about that as well. That was a very interesting movement around quote-unquote garbage, and is naturally an active participant in Lebanon's current uprising, which has been going on for a few months now. I had the pleasure of meeting Barchir in Beirut last year, just before the present uprising in Lebanon really took off. So I'm looking forward to hearing how things are going and what's happening there now, Barchir. I know that the situation has been quite serious, and we would really love to hear from it. So welcome today, Barchir.
Welcome all. So just a heads up at the start. You mentioned that Beirut is to the east. It's actually northwest of Amman, but that's the first point.
Ah, yes, there you go. You're correcting
Yeah.
my geography. Thank you. Okay,
You're
yes.
welcome.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm gonna be speaking a bit about at the beginning about my current organization, and then we'll be talking about the uprising that's been happening in Lebanon for the last 6 months. And finally, we'll move on to the current situation revolving around the coronavirus and everything else. So first of all, for the organization that I'm part of, it's called the Red Oak Club. It's a leftist student club at the American University of Beirut. It's been created in 2013, has been active on several student and outside campus related causes, from BDS, pro-Palestine, to feminism and student causes. We were also present during the 2015 crash crisis. It happened during the summer of 2015 for a few months, where there was a big issue of trash being uncollected and unresolved, and mainly in Beirut, so it was mainly centralized. And it was one of like a part of a series of movements that were happen that started in 2009 and then 2011 with the Asqat al-Nizam al-Ta'ifi, or down with the sectarian system in Lebanon, and then 2015 the trash crisis. And if we look at them, they're pretty much a series that keeps on evolving, and now we're going through the uprising of 2019. It started on October of 17 October of 2019. So during the current uprising, it was mainly started as an uprising from. It was decentralized, which was something very important, but also it was on different causes, on social, economic, and political causes that were different than what we saw in 2015. 2015, it was mainly revolving around the trash issue, so it was easy to counter somewhat. Now what we're going through is a bigger uprising. It started with economic issues that were happening for the last 2-3 years or more. The Lebanese lira is pegged to the dollar officially at a rate of 1,500 liras per dollar, and this is the official rate, and that's been changing in the black market, or the unofficial rate, and today it hit up to 4,000 Lebanese pounds for the dollar. So that's more than double the official rate. And people are as expected, the salaries have not been going up, so the purchasing power of people has been dropping so fast and so unexpectedly, and a lot of people have been losing their jobs. We have around 116,000 people who lost their jobs in 2019. We're talking about 116,000 out of a population of 4 million or 5 million. At the same time, we see that during the uprising, it was, as we said, decentralized, but at the same time, it was like a wide array of organizations and individuals joining it. So it wasn't only the expected middle class, somewhat politically educated in some way, youth or students. It was also, we saw the presence of, and the heavy presence of, a working class, of unemployed people, of populations living in slums, if you might say. And this is very important. And also at the same time in the peripheries and cities outside Beirut and villages. And this is somewhat unseen before in Lebanon. So yeah, it was a very important milestone that, like, we could see that there is hope and such movements. But at the same time, this movement, as expected, got a bit inactive, especially during Corona and the quarantine put in place by the government. So if we're talking about the official stance of the government during Corona, we have a quarantine in place. We have also curfew in place, and this has put a lot of boundaries in terms of social movements and movements on the ground. But at the same time, this has created a lot of more issues since, for example, for the daily workers, the people who practically don't have money to buy food if they're not working for the day, this has been putting a lot of burden on them. And we saw this during the last 2 weeks, I believe, in spontaneous protests lighting up all over the country, from Tripoli to Saida to Alay to Beirut. And this is expected to get even bigger with the situation becoming worse and worse. On the ground, the health situation isn't as bad as other countries. We actually don't have a public transportation system, so this might have unexpectedly helped the situation. And also at the same time, people followed precautions and precautionary measures pretty quickly, so that helped in that sense. But at the same time, as we mentioned, the economic situation of people is going down really fast, and this is something that as Red Oak we are seeing firsthand. The university, the AUB, the American University of Beirut, employs partly permanent or contractual workers, and at the same time it employs around 700 daily workers on its campus and in the university hospital medical center. So what has been happening is, for the last 4 months during the uprising, the salaries of these daily workers has been dropping. They've been called to work less and less, and at the same time, some of them have been getting fired. During last month, around 63, I think, workers lost their jobs. And this is a trend that is escalating more and more. They're getting threatened to lose more of their jobs. They're being forced to come to work, while the official government stance is to stop all activities. And at the same time, they're coming to work on their own accord with no transportation afforded by the university administration. And lastly, they're not being given protective measures. They're cleaning, they're working in the university, and in some cases in the hospital with no protective measures, or with inadequate measures put in place. So as Red Oak, we joined with several other student organizations and alumni and professors to put up a campaign. And we started a campaign to get their voices heard, the workers' voices heard, and to actually eventually reach a better situation for them, and for them to get their rights. And lastly, for the corona, I'm at the same time a member of the Lebanese Communist Party, and during this crisis, we've been helping with sanitizing some regions, some neighborhoods, and at the same time giving out aid in terms of food and really needed material in this aid. So this is pretty much the situation currently in Lebanon, and what we expect for the coming weeks and months is for the economic situation to deteriorate even more, and for the public backlash to become more and more visible and more present in the streets. So it can be looked at from two perspectives. It's at the same time people's lives getting worse and worse, but the reaction becoming more apparent and stronger in the face of this oppression. So hopefully this will end up more on the positive side.
Thank you very much, Barchir. Yes, again, lots of food for thought. So if you have any questions about Barchir's presentation or RAZAN's presentation, or you have some thoughts or comments, please put them in the Q&A, which you can find in your Zoom window. The Q&A, we've already received one from Gershom. Thank you very much. We'll get to that a little bit later, Gershom. And also for those of you watching on YouTube, please pass along your comments and questions as well. We'll move on now to our third panelist today. Charlotte will join us now on video. Charlotte Cates is the international coordinator of Samidoun, which is the Palestinian Prisoner Solidarity Network. She's also, and you correct me if I get old information, Charlotte. The same thing has happened for me. I go on the web, people go on the web and they search the information to introduce me. That's why I'm saying this. And sometimes it's a few years out of date. She's the coordinator of the International Committee of the National Lawyers Guild and a member of the organizing collective of the US campaign for the academic and cultural boycott of Israel, and is an organizer with Al-Awda, the Palestine Right to Return Coalition. Charlotte is talking to us today from Vancouver, Canada, where she had to get up very early. So thank you, Charlotte. And I'd like to welcome you to the discussion.
Thank you so much for inviting me today. It's an honor to be here with you, and of course to be here with all of the comrades of the ILPS, the International League of People's Struggle. Samidoun Palestinian Prisoner Solidarity Network is a member organization of the ILPS, and its anti-imperialist, internationalist focus is perhaps something that's more critical than ever during this time of global pandemic, because as many people have noted, the most dangerous virus threatening the people of the world is that of imperialism and colonialism, of racism, and of the capitalist system that is the creator of all of those ills. And in the case of Palestine, Palestinians are facing multiple forms of oppression and multiple forces that are enforcing that oppression: Zionism, the Israeli state, imperialism, and reactionary regimes. And when we look at how the global COVID-19 pandemic is affecting Palestinians, what we can see is that the pandemic itself is being used to create greater forms of material oppression, to intensify oppression and exploitation that already exists, and of course posing a very serious health threat to Palestinians from the river to the sea, but especially those who are most marginalized. And of course, this marginalization is not accidental. The marginalization of Palestinians is a product of Zionism and imperialism in the region, and the attacks of the global ruling class, and of the Israeli occupation, apartheid, and settler colonialism inside occupied Palestine. So those who are most at risk due to COVID-19 and coronavirus in Palestine are Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails, dispossessed Palestinian refugees in the camps, and those people who are living under siege in Gaza. And Gaza, of course, is both a center of resistance inside occupied Palestine, and it's also been subjected to a harsh and horribly devastating siege for people on a human level for almost 15 years at this point. And so when we see the siege on Gaza, this also brings to mind the sanctions and unilateral coercive measures that are being imposed on peoples and countries within the region, such as in Syria and Iran, certainly as RAZAN was speaking about earlier, in Yemen, and elsewhere in the world as well, such as in Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba. And how these acts of siege and sanctions are not, accidentally affecting civilians, are not accidentally putting people at greater risk of death and severe injury due to COVID-19, but are doing so very deliberately as part of an imperialist policy of further suppressing the economy of any people and nation that seeks to develop its sovereignty and independence. So when we're talking about COVID-19 inside Israeli jails, this is something that has sparked a tremendous amount of mobilization inside Palestine and is beginning to attract attention internationally as well, especially because there are many movements around the world that are struggling for the freedom of political prisoners and of all imprisoned people during this time of pandemic. I mean, as we know, prisons are a breeding ground for any kind of disease. And this is especially true because prisons are not neutral spaces. They are sites of colonial, imperialist, racist, capitalist violence against marginalized people. And so prisons are also places of medical neglect, of lack of access to proper health care, of complete denial of any interest in the health of prisoners because they are being excluded from society. And I mean, while this may not be true in every possible circumstance in states that are struggling to create a different society, it's certainly the case in the vast majority of places in the world, including the United States, including occupied Palestine, including many states in the Arab world, and certainly including the Philippines and elsewhere where people are struggling, and in Turkey where people are struggling for freedom for political prisoners and all confined people, not only due to the threat posed by COVID-19, but with very special urgency, recognizing that those who are behind bars are at perhaps a greater risk of death than they have been at any other time. So it is not simply a matter of seeking to free people because of the humanitarian crisis created by the pandemic, but because their struggle for freedom and liberation, which reflects the struggle of the Palestinian people as a whole for freedom and liberation, is facing a tremendous physical danger that is, once again, not something that is merely neutral or accidental, but is the product of Israeli policies of systematic medical neglect and negligence that have, since 1967, taken the lives of 67 Palestinian political prisoners inside Israeli jails. So when we say, why are there Palestinian prisoners? Why are Palestinians held behind bars? In many ways, the entire Palestinian population, whether it is the Palestinian people inside Palestine who are exposed to various forms of oppression, discrimination, segregation, racialized repression, military occupation, mass incarceration, land confiscation, home demolition, ethnic cleansing, siege, straight up killing, extrajudicial executions, or for Palestinians outside Palestine who are denied their right to return to their homes and have been denied that right for over 72 years by Zionist colonization. All Palestinians face some form of siege and imprisonment, but the 5,000 Palestinian prisoners held behind Israeli bars are held there because they reflect in some form or another, in one of the many forms that exist, of resistance to Israeli occupation, oppression, colonization. When we look at these Palestinian prisoners, we can see that over the years, Palestinian prisoners have regularly issued complaints about the way that their medical conditions are treated. Palestinian prisoners are denied access to healthcare. Their requests for surgeries or treatment or even testing to determine whether they have conditions are often denied and delayed for many years. One Palestinian prisoner, Sami Abu Diak, lost his life due to cancer at least in part and quite substantially due to the fact that he was misdiagnosed repeatedly, sent home with painkillers only, and it wasn't until his cancer had developed to an extremely advanced stage that he finally received the testing from the Israeli prison service and from the Israeli health system that diagnosed him with a severe form of stomach cancer. And so what we've seen is, this isn't just an isolated case, but a systematic approach to medical neglect and medical abuse of Palestinian prisoners inside Israeli jails. Now, of course, what is the greatest threat to Palestinian prisoners? It's the Israeli jailers, the repressive forces that continue to come inside the prisons while interacting normally in society, in Israeli society the rest of the time. In multiple cases, there have already been documented instances of Israeli interrogators, military judges, and military doctors who have come inside the prisons and have later been diagnosed with COVID-19. Prisoners who have been exposed to these individuals have not been provided with testing. One Palestinian prisoner was a 19-year-old Noureddin Sarsour was released only for it to be discovered that he was in fact positive for COVID-19. The prisoners that were held with him were not given tests despite repeated demands by the prisoners themselves and by their lawyers and by Palestinian prisoners advocacy organizations. This denial of testing is becoming a policy, and it just that goes along with the existing policies of Israeli medical neglect and negligence targeting Palestinian political prisoners inside Israeli jails. There are already 700 Palestinian prisoners who are sick with other illnesses and diseases, including 200 that are seriously ill with a variety of chronic illnesses, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, people who are at a much more severe risk of COVID-19. And rather than attempt to improve public health inside the prisons, or rather than attempt to address the concerns of the prisoners, what we've seen from the Israeli prison administration, which of course comes as no surprise, but it does highlight how the Israeli state views Palestinian prisoners as a threat to be eliminated rather than as human beings worthy of protection and rights, is that 140 different items, including sanitary products and cleaning supplies, were suddenly pulled from the prison canteen and overpriced prison store where prisoners are forced to buy their basic needs. So not only were the prisons not being cleaned, were the prison guards not providing sanitation, but the prisoners themselves couldn't even obtain access to these materials. And this happened immediately after the beginning of the pandemic. What also came along with this was a denial of family visits, a denial of legal visits. Now, of course, it may seem normal to block, the inflow and outflow of people into and out of the prisons, but for Palestinian political prisoners, this also comes with a denial of access to phone calls, a denial of access to video calls. Even those prisoners that are able to contact their lawyers can only do so like on one occasion and only if they're supposed to have a hearing coming up. There are extreme restrictions on Palestinian prisoners' ability to contact their loved ones, and this also applies to the 194 Palestinian children who are being held inside Israeli jails. They're also being denied any access to their families, and this is not the case for Israelis who are held on so-called criminal charges rather than Palestinians who are held on so-called security charges, which is the term the Israeli state uses for political prisoners inside Israeli jails. And these Palestinian prisoners are being targeted for this kind of medical negligence, not simply because Israel does not care about their health, because the entire project of imprisoning them is an attempt to silence and isolate the Palestinian resistance and its leaders from their people, from their communities, and from their broader community in the region and in the world. Palestinian political prisoners in the Palestinian Revolution is on the front lines of confronting Zionism and imperialism and reaction inside the region and around the world. And the political prisoners are those who are the leaders of that struggle, including people like imprisoned General Secretary of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, Ahmed Sadat, of leading Palestinian leftist and feminist Khalida Jarrar, and 5,000 fellow Palestinians who, whether they are organizing workers and women on their campus, in their communities, in their refugee camp, or whether they're participating in the armed struggle as freedom fighters, or whether they are simply writing posts on Facebook that express their support for the ability and right of Palestinian people under occupation and settler colonialism to resist and defend themselves against the system of Zionist colonization that has ruled their lives for the past 70 years. All of these people are targeted because they continue to reflect and represent the Palestinian resistance. And more than that, they represent a Palestinian leadership, an authentic Palestinian leadership that is being denied that status by a colonial occupation that seeks to instead slap them with a terrorist label in order to isolate them even further and in order to isolate them on an international level. So we see that the same organizations that the Israeli state labels as prohibited organizations, we see on the so-called terrorist lists of the United States, Canada, the European Union. And this isn't something that's accidental, that while the Israeli army, the US Army, and their proxy forces in the region and internationally are committing massive acts of terror against the people of the world and certainly the people of Palestine, it is Palestinians who are defending their fundamental right to resist and defend themselves against against colonialism, against apartheid, against the dispossession of people, against mass incarceration, against extrajudicial executions and home demolitions, who are labeled terrorists instead, in a complete inverse of reality. This attempt to isolate the Palestinian prisoners is something that needs international solidarity, support, and response. Certainly at this time of COVID-19, when Palestinian prisoners are daily threatened with death by Israeli medical negligence, but on a daily basis before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and beyond the pandemic. Because Palestinian political prisoners in many ways represent the present and the future of the struggle for the liberation of Palestine, which is central to any project that wishes to fight imperialism or imagine a new future in the region and around the world. And the Palestinian prisoners themselves are fighting back. They're struggling inside the prisons. They have already engaged in multiple hunger strikes. They've been returning meals. They're refusing to accept these conditions. They are banging on the walls of their prisons, demanding our attention. So internationally, we know that we can build a global struggle to fight back against imprisonment, to fight back against the colonial violence of incarceration and repression. From Palestine to Turkey to the Philippines to everywhere, people are fighting for justice. This is the time to put the political prisoners in the forefront and build our struggle together for their liberation and for the struggles for which they are imprisoned and for which they have sacrificed so much, the freedom of their people from Zionism, imperialism, and reactionary regimes. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Charlotte, for that impassioned presentation. So we've heard from RAZAN ZUAYTER, we've heard from Barchir Nakhal, and from Charlotte Cates. And now I'd asked all three of them to join me on video, please. And we'll open the floor to questions and comments. Also, panelists, feel free to invite or ask the other panelists questions if you have any. I'd like this to be a discussion and an exchange. So just hold your hand up or indicate that you would like to ask or have a question or a comment, and I'd be pleased to take it. So I do have a couple of questions from the audience. Again, those listening to us on Zoom, you can leave your questions in the Q&A section of Zoom. We already have a couple of questions, and those of you watching on YouTube Live, please leave your comments and questions there. So we have some questions and some comments. So I have one from Gershom from the audience, who says food sovereignty is crucial at this moment. I wanted to find out if there are funds set aside by the international agencies or authorities to support peasant farmers as far as promotion and production of local food is concerned amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Who would like to address that? Perhaps RAZAN?
Yes, thank you. Unfortunately, I haven't noticed any movement to support farmers at this moment. On the contrary, we received complaints from our members in several countries. For example, from Lebanon, FAO has allocated 500 million to support agriculture. It is blocked. And it's very much needed now. So we are going to address the FAO and other organizations to start moving in that direction. As I told you, I don't see there is an intention to support small farmers and local farming in our region as a political agenda. But we think that we can, if there is a political will, we can rely on our resources in the region. As Malcolm said in the beginning, this is a very rich region, and I think what is needed is now political will and strategic planning. And we felt actually that our governments have started to realize the importance of this issue. In Iraq, they started a program now. They banned around 28 products from import to support farmers, small farmers, to produce it themselves. In Syria, as I told you, they have their sovereignty. Jordan now is giving agriculture more, and Lebanon more attention. So I think this is the solution. The solution has to start from here, not from the aid or the funds from outside. But if you allow me, Malcolm, I have received a small question, also agricultural, from Sarojini. She's the director of Pesticides Action Network.
Please go ahead.
Asking about agroecology and the use of organic farming and agroecology, and the reducing of and acting against the intensified industrial agriculture. And we think, and we had made a research in our network about the effect of the industrial agriculture, which does not respect the ecosystem and the natural balance in the widespread of the epidemics. And for example, the growing of animals with the so much hormones and antibiotics and so on, and the much use of pesticides and very intensified agriculture and the monopoly of agriculture. And as you remember, the Green Revolution had started this breaking in the natural balance. And we think this should be addressed. This is an answer for Saro. For another question I got from also is asking if there are what countries in the region have a tendency to face hunger or lack of food resources. And my answer to this is all the region, if they don't attend to local production, they will face this challenge. The Gulf countries will face it definitely. Unfortunately, our region imports 50% of its demand, and in the wheat and the grains, they import maybe more than 80%. So we are all the countries will face these disasters if they don't start producing their own food. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Razan. So yes, I just had a question for Charlotte, just as I was reflecting. And I guess it goes to the other speakers as well. I see that thanks to probably the internet, it's not always that stable for the time being. Barchir is not with us, so hopefully he'll be able to rejoin us shortly. So Charlotte, yes. I can understand the serious situation of the Palestinian prisoners at the moment. What is Samidoun suggesting that people who are listening to this can do, and what are kind of actions that we can take that could best assist them?
Absolutely. Well, so Samidoun is an international network that works to organize support and solidarity actions for...
Welcome back, Barchir. Excuse me, Charlotte. Thank you. Continue, Charlotte.
Sure. Sure. Samidoun is an international network that works to organize support and solidarity actions for the Palestinian prisoners. You can visit our website at samidoun.net. It's www.samidoun.net. I don't know if I can write it in the chat or not, but I will try. Now, we are calling on people to do several things, and these are calls that are coming from Palestinian prisoners. The first, just so to be clear, like the first and most important demand is the freedom of the Palestinian prisoners, and this is the case during the pandemic, but also beyond the pandemic, because the struggle for their freedom isn't just about the humanitarian need to protect their lives at this time, but the right of a people to struggle for their liberation and to not be incarcerated by a settler colonial Zionist project that seeks to deny their existence. So we're struggling for freedom for the prisoners, and then we're struggling for a series of demands that have been issued by the prisoners' movement, including the right to access sanitary products, to have regular phone and video calls, including the installation of public phones with their family members and with their lawyers, so that if there is something that's happening inside the prisons, that what could happen now is it could be kept a secret. It could be kept from public knowledge, and it could be kept from those families. It's actually a form of psychological torture against the families. So in terms of what we can do, we can take part in petition campaigns. We can take part in public calls. We have a number of those calls on our website. We're also linking this campaign with struggles of people around the world for prison justice. So in the United States, for example, there have been several car caravans. There have been other kind of bike caravans outside ICE detention centers, outside the Metropolitan Detention Center in New York, because we're not saying that this is a struggle for justice for Palestinian prisoners only. We recognize that the struggle is international, and it's a struggle for political prisoners, and it's also a struggle for justice of all people who are victims of racist and colonial prison systems around the world, and certainly within the imperialist and colonial powers. And something that we can do all the time, and something that's a really important part of this movement and of the Palestinian call, is to boycott Israel. And so the movement for boycott, divestment, and sanctions is a call for consumer boycott of Israel, but also academic and cultural boycott, also refusing to engage with Israeli institutions, refusing to engage with Israeli organizations and Israeli government projects, because we can't just see these as like neutral forces. These kinds of projects and institutions are directly enmeshed with the Zionist state, with a project of the elimination of the Palestinian people, with the dispossession of the Palestinian people from their land. And so whether it's building a boycott campaign against companies like Hewlett-Packard and G4S, there are major multinational corporations that are directly implicated in the imprisonment of Palestinian prisoners and the oppression of the Palestinian people, to boycotting, Israeli oranges and pears and agriculture, because that's stolen Palestinian land that's being exploited to further dispossess and oppress the Palestinian people. Joining the movement for boycott, divestment, and sanctions is one of the most direct and material things that people can do everywhere in the world to help support the Palestinian people in their struggle for liberation.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. Barchir, as we wait for questions to come in, and please send your questions or comments along. What's the next stage in Lebanon? Do you think? The uprisings have been going on for a while. The situation there is quite serious. And of course, the COVID-19, as you were mentioning, comes on top of all of the other social and political problems that exist there. So what do you see as the next happening during the next period? What are the, obviously the resistance will continue. How do you see that taking place over the next few months?
Okay, first of all, I'm sorry the power went off for a few minutes.
Yes,
so
no, very understandable. No problem. Welcome back.
Yeah, so yeah, the current situation, as I was saying, is deteriorating at the level of the whole state. The economic situation of the country is going off the charts in terms of public debt that is rising to more than 150% of the country's GDP. It's one of the highest ratios of public debt to GDP in the world. What's happening at the same time is with the pandemic and everything is that there is someone who has to eventually pay for all this. The country has to be economically rebuilt currently, and for the last 30 years of neoliberal policies, it's been basically relying on services sector, on rentier economy, on non-productive sectors of the economy. So now we're paying for that on all scales, on the scale of food sovereignty, on the scale of medical equipment that we don't have and that we need to import actually, and at the economic level where we're so dependent on imports. Actually, we import $22 billion per year and we only export around $2 billion. So that's more than 10 times the ratio of imports to exports. for the official stance of the government and the ruling class is that those that are disenfranchised, those that are at the bottom of the economic scale, have to bear the burden and the brunt of all this. There are rising taxes, proposed sell-off of the whole state, complete privatization. We have projects that are in the hundreds of millions and even billions of dollars from the World Bank, and it's all putting more and more debt and burden on the Lebanese economy. So, for example, there's the Bisri Dam project that is funded through a $900 million World Bank loan, and that we've been fighting actually for around a year or more. So we're doing a lot of progress on that. It's only an example of what the ruling class is trying to enforce as a solution. They don't want, so at the same time we have a capital control, and we have a lot of burden and boundaries on withdrawal from banks, especially on accounts that are in dollar and foreign currencies. So this is putting all the burden on the working class and some of the middle class as well. Our proposed and our perspective on the matter is that, such as all other leftist organizations in the country, I mentioned I'm also part of the Lebanese Communist Party. Basically, we all agree that this approach needs to be changed, and this can only be changed radically. It can only be changed through popular movements and through the uprising that is happening, and that we eventually hope that it blows up into a revolution, because this is a very obvious issue with the current structure that can't find a solution for the problem that it itself put us in. Those in power, if we want to talk about the political regime, it's composed of all the sectarian parties from, if we want to talk about Hezbollah, Harakat Amal, the Future Movement, they're all, even though some of them are currently what we might call opposition parties, but they're all very much aligned on this approach to the solution. And this political spectrum is also very linked to the also economic leaders. So if we see that the owners of most banks and the biggest investors in the country and all the big players on the economic scene are at the same time either big politicians or they're part of their family or something like that. So it's very enshrined or very connected in terms of a ruling class. So for us, any change on the social level that we are hoping to achieve, and also on the public health and all these, it has to go through a political change, through movement on the ground that the people are leading. And this is hopefully what we'll end up seeing, because as you already see in terms of factors on the ground, or cases of violence, of even racism, which are always tools used by the ruling class to cut off any form of class unity. It's very much abundant, and we're trying to see where that can be avoided. And we actually have a lot of cases where people are becoming more aware and more conscious of how the fact that they're working and they're or unemployed or living in poverty, that gives them a lot more in common with other poor and working people from other sects and religions, who are being divided through sectarian politics and everything. So one more thing is that we also see the sectarian parties trying to play the role of service givers to replace the state and its supposed role in that. So that's also very important, because it's very dangerous to rely on that.
Thank you very much, Barchir. We'll take one more question, and then I'll go back to our three panelists for a 1 minute wrap up, if that's okay. So I have a question here. It's a little long. I'm trying to understand it. Yes. How much is the percentage of agroecology and or organic farming in terms of land size and production of food crops in your region, countries? Are there specific labor employment challenges for women and young people brought about by COVID-19? And since trade sanctions are so destructive, are there any proposed strategies to overcome these sanctions? So it's a question about percentage of land to agroecology or organic farming, specific challenges for women and young people, and the impact of trade sanctions and how to overcome these. So who would like to address those? Razan, perhaps you could take a stab and maybe wrap up your portion at the same time.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you for the question. For percentage of agroecology land, we don't really have much data about that. It is growing actually, but not enough. Needs more support and more governmental and civil society collaboration to bring the best out of it. It's the only solution really against all these troubles that we are facing in the modern world. What can be done? We have to institutionalize our work. We have to work horizontally as movements together, and we have to form coalitions. And this is what we're trying to do. We have to empower the people. We have to give back the power to the people so that we can face all these threats. And we have to use all kinds of resistance. All types of resistance are legitimate and needed to face sanctions, wars, and all types of occupations, especially in Iraq and Palestine and Iraq. And only through solidarity and coalition and working together we can achieve this.
Thank you very much. So perhaps we can, let me just see, just checking the questions here. Probably you already covered that, Charlotte, but maybe you could include it in your wrap up. So the question from Rima is what's being done to help refugees in camps, including the refugee camps in Lebanon and Jordan, to protect them from COVID-19? Rima apologizes for joining late, so he may have mentioned it. So she's just asking that quickly. And yes, so if you could address that, Charlotte, and perhaps give a 1 minute wrap up, that would be great. And we'll go to the other speakers after you.
Sure, thank you. In terms of obviously refugees in the camps are in fact one of the highly vulnerable Palestinian populations to the spread of COVID-19 for many of the reasons that we talked about before. And of course, Palestinian refugees, for example, in Lebanon, often rely on UNRWA for health services, as well as health services that are provided by Palestinian organizations and social movements inside the camps. One thing that is definitely happening is that social organizations and movements and community centers, like grassroots organizing within the camps, is being done in order to help support people and enable them to participate in social and physical distancing. I mean, many Palestinian refugees they're barred from working in many professions inside Lebanon, and in addition, many work as day laborers in the construction industry, which of course was already going through a crisis due to many of the issues that Barchir talked about earlier. But with the advent of COVID-19 and the shutdown of most of these projects, people have very little access to, Palestinian refugees in Lebanon have very little, even more access to income in a population that was already dealing with extreme amounts of poverty. So these organizations like Al-Naqab Center in Burj al-Barajna camp, there are organizations doing this work, Social Solidarity Center in Ain al-Halwa, the Palestinian Cultural Club in Badawi camp. They're organizing to provide these food packages to Palestinian families in order to enable that, and also with sanitation products, not just to provide food so that people can survive, but also to allow people to have their food at home for like a good period of a month so that they don't constantly need to be going out and interacting with other people. So it's also enabling people to continue social and physical distancing to protect themselves. And there's a fundraising campaign to support that project being organized by Al-Auda, the Palestine Right to Return Coalition, and the Palestinian Youth Movement, which is also a member of ILPS in the United States. So that's if people are interested in, donating to that campaign or just spreading the word about it and building social solidarity around that campaign, that would be extremely helpful to supporting the steadfastness of the refugees in the camps. And so just to conclude, of course, that this struggle is ongoing and international. It doesn't begin and end with COVID-19, but it does once again highlight the importance of the Palestinian struggle against all forms of exploitation and oppression on the front lines against Zionism and imperialism, and the necessity of an internationalist approach to supporting the Palestinian struggle and to supporting freedom and liberation for all peoples fighting imperialism and for all prisoners struggling for their freedom. We know that even Palestinian prisoners and prisoners of the Palestinian struggle are in jails around the world. For example, George Ibrahim Abdallah has been jailed for over 35 years in French prisons. He is in danger from COVID-19 and of being further denied his ability to return to his homeland in Lebanon. And so when we call for the freedom of Palestinian prisoners, when we call for the freedom of prisoners around the world, we also include George Abdallah and fellow Palestinians and Arabs who were jailed in imperialist jails for their participation in the struggle for the freedom of their homelands and of their people. And so finally, I just want to encourage people to get involved with Samidoun, with the movement to support the struggle for justice in Palestine. You can visit our website at samidoun.net, and we look forward to building the struggle together internationally for justice and liberation everywhere around the world. Victory for Palestine and freedom for the prisoners. Thank you again for inviting me to be with you today and inviting Samidoun to be part of this discussion.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. Next, we'll hear from Barchir for a 1-minute wrap up, and hopefully we can hear, people can hear if you have any suggestions how we can get involved and be part of the struggles that you are part of.
Okay, so I just noticed one question that was sent about Lebanon and how it's affected by surrounding countries and the crisis. So as always, the ruling parties and the country are very much affiliated with outside interference, and it's always affected by, let's say, countries in the West and the East, whatever, and also surrounding countries from Israel to even Syria, and this plays a big role on the political scene in the country. And it's one of the main reasons for the current uprising that's calling for no affiliation with any outside country. So well, that's one part, and also for the issue of Corona and the current situation, as with a lot of other countries, the public healthcare system has been getting attacked through neoliberal policies for years and years. That's why there's a big need and there's a big reliance on grassroots movements, on certain organizations that are basically made up of volunteers on the health scene as well. So we have volunteers trying to go and give out help, whatever. I sent a link to the SPL, Secours Populaire Libanais. It's one organization that I'm volunteering with. It's affiliated with leftist organizations and is active through giving out food aid, through operating hospitals and having volunteers work in neighborhoods and whatever. So that's basically, with the absence of a strong and able state, that's the best hope we have, at least in the short term. Yeah, so that's pretty much it.
Thank you very much, Barchir. Next we'll wrap up with a short intervention from RAZAN, please. You started off our conference on West Asia and the COVID-19 pandemic and the people's response. So would you be able to wrap up? RAZAN, are you still there?
Yes, Malcolm.
Yes, please. So yes, please take one moment, take 1 minute to wrap up, please, if you could.
I just wanted to say that
can you turn your video on? Can you turn your video on, please?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, very good. Okay.
I just wanted to say in summary that the coronavirus has, besides its threats, it has many positive ideas to start, and we as people's movements, we should always have hope and take the positive things. We are now part of a great movement to change the processes and to fight capitalism, imperialism, and resist all kinds of occupation and to follow all possible resistance to make us overcome. I am very optimistic, and I think the solidarity that we are showing each other is a big factor in our success. And I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, RAZAN.